Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for this webinar. My name is Yvonne Field. I'm the CEO and founder of the Ubele initiative. I'd just like us to wait a few moments so that a few other people can join us, maybe till 18:32. We've got quite a packed program this evening for this webinar. And, we really appreciate you joining us this evening. We've had almost 400 people sign up. So I think it'd be worth just please waiting for just a minute or two. What would be helpful is if you'd like to put in the chat your name, and if you're representing the organisation, the organisation that you're here on behalf would be also really helpful for networking purposes and for sharing information. Okay, I think we'll start. So once again, good evening, everyone. My name's Yvonne Field. I'm the CEO and founder of the Ubele initiative. Welcome to this evening's webinar. It is an emergency conversation, given that over the past 10, 12 days, we have seen what I would assess as the best of our communities and the worst of our communities. And I think it would be helpful for us just to start this webinar with a moment of reflection for all those people up and down the country who've been impacted by the horrific murders of 3 children and the attempted murder of 10 other girls and young women, as well as the so-called response to those murders that we've seen, those racist responses we've seen on the streets of our country. So perhaps if we can just spend a moment to reflect. Thank you. Okay, so we've called this emergency conversation in order to give an opportunity to our community members to convene, to network, to hear what's been happening around the country, as well as to try and begin to identify what we think that we might need to do, particularly longer term. The racist, violent Islamophobia response that we've seen on our streets have left a lot of people up and down the country shocked, traumatized, angry, and dismayed. And as I said, the response that we need to make to this, to ensure that we have safe communities, communities where different communities can live together in harmony, will be long and I think quite painful as we move forward. The We Need Answers campaign was actually started by Ubele in 2020 as a response to the disproportionate impact of COVID on Black and racially minoritized communities. We did a campaign, we gathered over 30,000 signatures, and we actually pushed the government and held them to account about the disproportionate impact. We have an opportunity here as a result of this tragic incident that happened and violent racist attacks that we've seen, that have seen our hostels, individuals, mosques, community infrastructure trashed and burnt and people being attacked as individuals up and down the country. We have an opportunity to push the government and to say enough is enough. This evening's webinar has a number of components to it and elements to it. And as I said at the beginning, we've had almost 400 people signed up to join us, and this is being recorded, so it will be put out on our YouTube panel thereafter, as well as through our social media other social media platforms. What we tried to do this evening is to offer a platform for a number of people who've been working at the coalface of communities, but also have a bit of an overview of what's been happening in our communities. And we'll hear from them in 3 different segments, looking at, what's been happening, also looking at what does the community need to do, what has been the response, and as I said, what needs to happen going forward, what might be some of our demands. We've also designed a short poll, so those people who aren't able to contribute either through questions or through the actual presentation of ideas and information can actually also have their voices heard. The poll will be put on the chat during the course of the conversation. We will also send out the poll to everyone who's here afterwards, so that you can complete it within the next day or so if you don't complete it this evening. However, we'd encourage you to try and complete it during the session, and that we will actually publish the results afterwards. We know that these spaces and these kinds of conversations are deeply painful, and we know that up and down the country, hundreds and thousands of people have actually been left traumatized. My brother was with me this afternoon at home, and he said, and he's not the political type in any way, shape or form, and he said, I was walking down the street, Yvonne, yesterday, and an Asian man came and stood right next to me. I mean, up close, which would normally not happen. And he had a real deep sense that, that connectedness and feeling of sort of protection and safety was what this gentleman was looking for by standing right next to my brother. We want to also create then this evening, apart from these segments of discussion, the poll, but also we want to create a space after this session at 8:15, so 15 minutes after we formally and officially end the webinar. For those who would like some support and to be in a space with others, anyone here can join. It's a bit of a healing space for 45 minutes. And we're fortunate to have someone called Rowan Khan, you'll hear from him right at the end, who's a racial trauma specialist, to hold that space for us. So please feel free to join that space. Just stay on the call. I'll mention it again at the end, and that you'll be, that Rowan will actually hold that space for us, those of us who want to be in it for up to 45 minutes. So that's the agenda that we've got for you this evening. 3 segments and 3 conversations about the questions that we've put out, a poll that's happening during the session. There'll be conversations about demands towards the end of the session, and then a healing space for any of us who would like to join it. I can see that there's 133 people on this call, and as I said at the beginning, welcome. This is the most difficult of times, and obviously it comes in fast in the wake of Brexit, COVID, cost of living crisis. It just goes on. It goes on and on. And yeah, it's taking its toll. There's no doubt about that. I would like, therefore, to move into the main program this evening. I'd like to ask my colleague and fellow director, Philip Ude, to host this conversation for this first segment. And he will introduce the contributors that are on that segment. I will mute and I will also stop my video for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. That was a really powerful context setting. And yeah, I think that definitely something has shifted in the way that we're navigating Britain as Black and brown people And even myself, I was on a flight. I was on a flight going to Crete. And if anyone goes on, I'm sure a lot of you are going on holidays and so on, and you get on these budget airlines. So I was on one of these EasyJet. And then you see like, a group of people, you think, oh, maybe, maybe previously I'd say we're all British. And to some extent, maybe I had a different question mark in my mind as to, how do you see me? Do you see me the same? And I think, this has brought a lot of racial tensions to the fore. And we're going to discuss some of that now in this panel, how these racial tensions, I guess, what's really happening and what's underpinning. And, the question I'm going to ask our panelists now in this segment is, what is their assessment of the current situation? So I'm going to ask Mudaser Ali from Muslim Charities Forum, Matthew Johnson from the Runnymede Trust, and Jacqueline McKenzie. If you can all switch your cameras on. Maybe, Becky, if you could put us, okay, yeah, I think you can see us all. Okay, fantastic. So I think your profiles have been shared, but maybe just by brief way of introduction. My name is Philip Uday. I'm one of the directors at the Ubele initiative. Matt, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Johnson. I'm head of research at Runnymede Trust, race equality think tank based across the different parts of the country.
Mudaser, do you want to go next?
My name is Mudaser Ali. I'm head of development at Muslim Charities Forum. We're an infrastructure organisation that supports, connects, and represents British Muslim-led voluntary and community sector organisations up and down the country.
Fantastic. And Jacqueline?
Hello, good evening, everyone, and Chair. I'm Jacqueline McKenzie. I'm in the Human Rights Department at law firm Lee Day, where I head up immigration, asylum, Windrush, and reparations.
Okay, fantastic. So for me, I think what's been missing from a lot of the mainstream narratives is, how did we arrive at this current situation? I think there's a lot of, particularly when you look at government ministers and their response, there's a lot of let's address the criminality. Let's throw people in jail for the wrongdoing, for the violence and destruction of property. But what's really happening? Jacqueline, how did we get here?
Well, I think it's right, firstly, to put people in jail who commit criminal acts, so long as they're found guilty or plead guilty. But I think the people who are going to go to jail aren't necessarily the root. Well, they're certainly not the root of the problem. They're the end of it. And really what's happening is that we've had, and this has been well ventilated, so, I'm not the first person to say it, but we've had politicians, particularly in the last government. We've had sections of the media. We've had people who call themselves political spokespeople and commentators and influencers and all that sort of thing, riling up a group of people who are completely marginalized, deprived and dispossessed around the country, who successive governments have failed miserably. But instead of governments investing and planning and caring for those communities, they've managed to convince them that somebody else is the problem. And that might be Muslims, it might be Black people, it might be brown people, but it's somebody else is the problem. And because education is so poor in some of those communities, and because their lives are quite miserable in many ways, and I've worked with them for 2 decades, it's very easy to get them to accept what they're told. But I just want to add very quickly, because I know we don't have a lot of time, that although I talk about the political commentators and people like Tommy Robinson, I mean, he's a politician, but he's a commentator of sorts, Nigel Farage and people like him, people in the Reform Party, people like Suella Braverman, it's really important for things to be named. In the same way we need to be naming what's going on as racism and Islamophobia, we also need to we need to get the dialectics of history correctly recorded. If we don't do that, then we're just really messing around. And in the way that you've got all of these people who have perpetuated this idea that the problem is migrants and Muslims and Black people and brown people. What we've also got to be very aware of is that beneath all of them are some very, very dark forces. Now, some of those are in the UK, some of these are overseas, some of them are in Eastern Europe, a lot of them are around Trump's movement of people, but they're everywhere. And they are funding this. They are ventilating it through social media. We've seen even the owner, Elon Musk, of one of the major social media platforms, contributing to this debate, advocating it as a free speech debate, rather than calling out the criminal activity that is the low-level end of what's really going on. The pernicious racism and Islamophobia is quite sophisticated, and unfortunately they're using people on the street to create criminal activity and thuggish behavior. They're the ones going to go to jail, not the people who should be going to jail.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. And Matt, so if we know that, I guess, the people who are at the hard end of, I guess, capitalism, we could call it, or, at the getting the short straw in this economy are now turning on, or we're being turned against each other. What do you think, Matt, that they're trying to distract us from? What do you think are the real underlying issues that are impacting on people that are making them turn against us?
Yeah, I mean, there is an economic context to this. We've had a cost of living crisis. We've had increasing levels of deprivation, and let's say government failure as well, and economic failure, economic issues. So yeah, it's very convenient to blame the other and to blame someone who doesn't look like you as well. I want to add to kind of Jacqueline's point around some of the institutional, I guess, some of the institutional neglect that we've seen around this issue as well. So this hasn't really come out of nowhere. So in 2020, the Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, he actually said, this is in 2020, that right-wing extremism is UK's fastest growing threat. And he also said, and this is in 2020, he also said that more young people are being drawn towards terrorist activity. And then he said that 17 children, some as young as 14, were being arrested on terrorism charges in the past sort of 18 months. And that far-right extremism was the fastest growing threat to the UK. Despite this, the response has not been very sober, I would say. I mean, despite this, we've also had continued dehumanizing language, the denial of the existence of institutional racism. The words that we have heard have been words such as invasion, we want our country back, stop the boats, letterboxes, the people from Bangladesh, our culture, my Britain. And this is not just language from the streets, but this is also language from the seats of Westminster. And it's not only in social media as well, it's also in traditional media. And there was some report that came out by RUSI today, actually, that also spoke of the UK having a two-tier approach to extremism, and that actually, as we've seen in the labeling of the rioters as far right thuggery, the extremist element and the radicalization element is also something that has been missing from the discourse, and right-wing violence is often classified as just mere thuggery by politicians, and depending on the color of your skin, depends if you get labeled terrorist or not, which has implications in terms of how these things are dealt with from a legal standpoint as well. So what I say is, what I'm saying is that basically that this is not emerged out of a vacuum. This has been something that has been bubbling up over a period of. There have been warnings about this in recent years, but the reaction has not been to take it seriously enough. The reaction has been, in fact, to actually stoke the flames, and now we're seeing what we have seen last week, and what many communities are still facing in terms of feeling unsafe in their communities too.
Absolutely. And Mudaser, I'll come to you in terms of, obviously the initial misinformation that came out was that, this attack or the tragic murder of young girls was committed by somebody with Islamic background, perhaps migrant background, perhaps illegal migrant background. How was this, how do you think this type of information just really plays into further Islamophobia, further racial divides, and really also class, I would say, yeah, class warfare between, what are effectively all working class or lower class people to some extent?
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I think that there's definitely an agenda that we can see, and there's definitely something at play here at a deeper level. I may even challenge you on some of the use of language there as well, in that for us and where we stand and the leaders who we engage with regularly, and have been engaging with, who've been working around the clock to try to protect and fortify their communities. What it seems like to us, and from our perspective, isn't actually misinformation, but rather disinformation, which is that someone has a vested interest to try to turn members of lower socioeconomic background communities against, again, other people who are also from disadvantaged communities, who are facing some of the same structural issues, who've had youth services also decimated, who've had employment opportunities restricted from them. We know from evidence that if you have a Muslim sounding name, you're less likely to get a job interview. So we know that there are similar issues at play here. There are similar risks and there are similar threats, but it seems that there's been a deliberate attempt to try to scapegoat this one community, who are members of Muslim communities. It's something that we can't deny. So as a point of thanks to you, I'm glad to see that as allies from the Ubele initiative and Runnymede Trust, and also from yourself, Jacqueline, as well, in the capacity that you're here today, that you are using the term Islamophobia, and that you are recognizing the anti-Muslim element of this. For our part of us is thankful that, yes, our brothers and sisters who are from the Seventh Adventist Church, or from the Gurdwara, from the Sikh communities, or from the Hindu temples, aren't facing this as a challenge or as an issue. There is an inherently Muslim element to this, right? And that we're seeing the community anchor organizations for Muslim communities, which are typically the mosques, being attacked and being singled out. We're seeing women in particular, right? Whether that's young Muslim women, or Muslim women of different ages, being singled out, being subject to harassment, being even subject to types of physical abuse as well. So there definitely seems to be something more structural and deeper at play here. It seems to be recognized in different places as well. I mean, some of the engagements that we've been having with community leaders in our network are quite concerning, right? So even in places in the north of where we've seen things be quite bad, in terms of the rioting, and some of the aggression that we've seen towards members of Muslim communities. Unfortunately, some of the sentiment is that we're only really preparing for the beginning, right? So there are leaders who feel that actually we're just at the beginning of a cycle of dissonance, which we're going to see move forward. So I completely echo some of the points that have been raised, by yourself, Matt, and also from Jacqueline as well, that we're seeing something which is actually structural, right? There are structural issues at play here, which are really locking our communities and suffocating them, right? To the point that they're almost trying to compete over air to breathe in now. And of course that drives all sorts of all sorts of behaviors. So I think that I definitely echo some of that sentiment. I think that what in particular I want to talk to you here as a challenge or concern that we're noticing amongst leaders in our communities in particular, it's just really the sense of neglect and disregard of young people in all of this. And in some ways it almost feels a bit sadistic. Yes, we appreciate that there's definitely a position to play for quite hard and quite swift criminal prosecution. But what we also need to recognize is that even some of our own, some members of our own communities, whether that's Muslim or not, whether that's South Asian, Black, or other sort of ethnic groups as well, have in sometimes been at the receiving end of some of that disproportionate action. So that whilst we do recognize its significance here and its utility here, what we do need to recognize is that really that's just a sticking plaster solution. And in some senses, there is a bit of a feeling or concern that that's a sticking plaster that's been doused in poison. Because what's going to happen to those young people now who go into the system, who then further have their prospects reduced and potentially form collectives inside? What then happens when they're outside? Do we potentially see an even worse spike or another cycle in a few years, which is even more dangerous than this? Because we know this because some of our communities have experienced this at the hands of the criminal justice system, right? And some of the issues which exist in overcrowding and other areas. I don't necessarily want to go into that too much because I think it's beyond the scope of this. But I think that what we definitely need to recognize here is that there are some very, very intense structural issues at play. And I'm hoping that later on in our conversations when we're looking at demand, we might be able to open up that discussion a bit more. But yeah, thank you for the space.
Absolutely, that's really, really insightful. And I think there's a few things coming out in the chat that I think might be helpful. But I think a question that I really would like to put to the three of you to answer really briefly, if possible, is knowing that there are systemic issues underlying this, knowing that it benefits certain classes and sections of society for there to be this type of, I will call it disinformation as well, because, the identity of that killer could have been released quite quickly on to stop this spread of disinformation. Instead, it took quite an extended period. What do any structural I guess, what could a structural response look like? What would it look like? What is the question we're asking? Jacqueline, I'll come back to you first.
You'd come to me with the most difficult bit of it first. What would a structural response? Well, I mean, we've seen a fantastic response from organizations like Ubele, who've hosting this space, like people who've been out on the street. There may be some issues around, where are Black and brown people in some of the organizing of some of the counter protests, but nevertheless the counter protests are there, and they have been outnumbering the far right protests quite significantly. We've seen some amazing things. I saw, I think it's in Southport, where the wall of a mosque was mowed into, and the community came together, white men alongside Muslim men came together to fix that wall. So with all of these sorts of things, you see incredible solidarity. You see it from amongst your friendship groups, your colleagues, and so on, that sort of allyship, as we saw with Black Lives Movement. And that's all very good. But I think structurally, we really do need to address the issues in society that enable people to be treated as fodder, because this is exactly what has happened here. People are being used. And you're right, somebody said in the chat, they may well become martyrs. Mudaser's absolutely right, that they may become strengthened. Half of them have no idea what ideology is or what they're talking about, but they go into these prisons and they caucus in them, they're targeted, and they are groomed. And, we talk about prevent, and prevent disproportionately targets one community. It ought to be now targeting some of these young men, particularly those in the prisons and those on the periphery of the criminal justice system who may not end up in prison, but who are responsible for criminal acts or quasi-criminal acts. But I think really the major response needs to come from government. One of the things that hasn't happened is there's not been a positive narrative about immigration and migration. I mean, I've been doing quite a lot of media coverage over the past couple of weeks, and people, they always put you up against, some sort of anti-migrant type to have a row with. That's the quality of the media in the UK at the moment. And a chap said the other day, well, there's 1 million people waiting for housing, for medical appointments in the NHS, so we can't have people coming over in boats. So 30,000 people came last year. How does that have any dint on the waiting lists in the NHS? It doesn't. The problem in the NHS is lack of investment, planning and care and the attempt to try and privatise huge chunks of it. So, I mean, one, we want to hear from government. I mean, this government, the Home Secretary hadn't even warmed her seat properly, and she was talking about raiding salons and, hair and nail salons and car washes and takeaways. And those micro businesses which keep society going and which employ lots of people, most of them are now run by people who are legally here, because it's very difficult to work in this society now since the hostile environment. So, you know, a lot of those raids, and I've sat in on one of those raids, I happened to be in one of those places when it was raided, a lot of those raids achieve absolutely nothing other than to make it look as though you're being tough on migration, and it riles up more people. So I was very disappointed to see that was one of the first policy initiatives emanating out of this government. So they need to stop all of that. And they need to help with the educational process that is needed about migration and the facts and the truth of it. Secondly, they really do need to address some of these communities where there is absolutely nothing going on. You know, 2, 3, and now 4 generations of worklessness, poor healthcare, poor transport links, so people can't even get to a supermarket. So they're living off takeaways at the edge of their housing estates, you know, no cultural facilities, no recreational facilities, nothing for young people. I know government doesn't have any money, but they're going to have to address that. They're also going to have to reach out to Black and Asian people who are affected by this and talk to us and deliver some projects that help kind of in the healing process of this. I think that's a really, really important thing. I could see you looking at me and saying wind up. So I had about 4 or 5 more, but I'll stop with those. I'm sure the others will add to that list of things that need to happen structurally and quickly.
Thank you so much. Matt, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and Mudaser, you're going to be joining the next panel. So I'm going to keep you in the, I think you're joining the next panel, or I think you're joining, yes, you're joining one of the following panels. So I'll let you come back in at that point. But Matt, I'll give you 30 seconds just to give us a key structural thing that needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Jacqueline, with everything that you've said there. I think one thing to add is also around the new threats around algorithmic accountability and bias, and what we're seeing online with bots and people just being whipped up, and the lack of legislative framework that we're seeing on social media and social harms as well. I think there does need to be something done there in the digital space as well. But yeah, I fundamentally agree with what Jacqueline's saying, and I know time is short, so I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. And look, this is not the end of the conversation. You know, obviously this conversation is the beginning of what could hopefully be a process to really bring forward proper solutions to government and other parties. But yeah, Mudaser, I'm going to let you join in the next panel, to come. Thank you so much to all of you for your inputs. And I'll invite Professor Patrick Vernon, OBE, to introduce and to chair the next panel. Thank you all.
Okay, thanks, Philip, and thanks for the previous panel. And just thanks for everyone for being online. We've just got over 177 people, which is really important. So I'm Patrick Vernon. I'm going to be spending the next 20 minutes with the panel to look to explore the community response and what government should do. So we've got, on this panel, I've got Jabeer Butt, Chief Executive of Race Equality Foundation. Got Kimberly McIntosh, who is the policy lead on the Windrush Justice Programme for Action for Race Equality. And then finally, I have Susan Correa from the Kanlungan Filipino Consortium as well. So all 3 of you, if you could just join us, please. I think I can't see Jabeer there, man.
Patrick, I am here, but somebody's turned my video off. I think the host has turned my video off.
Okay, don't worry. We need to see your face, Jabeer. Don't worry. I was asked to be part of this process, and I just literally got back from Malta 3 hours ago. So forgive me if I look a bit too bright and a bit, whatever it is, the sunshine, about 35 degrees. But actually, I've been watching the media for the whole week while I've been away. And yesterday, in my last day in Malta, I was in a shop buying some coffee, and I was speaking to a Maltese guy who runs a corner shop, and he said to me, you know, my wife's English. I've got a daughter that's in the UK. What is going on with Britain? What, you know, and that has been the response around the world internationally. What is happening as well? And just before I bring the panel in, just want to share that this reminds me of some of the work I've been involved with for a number of years. I can remember what happened in 9/11 when I was working for the NHS in Brent, and there was a massive I mean, the word Islamophobia was starting to be used around about that time, and there was, women were attacked with hijabs. There was lots of racism taking place in schools, but the community came together around the country. Then the London bombings in 2005, I was chair of Westminster Race Equality Partnership, and that was pretty horrific. If you remember the London bombings, and particularly again, what it was the impact on the community and the responses around the country as well. And then at the 2011, what took place, the murder of Mark Duggan, and had an impact in Hackney and in Croydon. These incidents are quite important because there've been lots of analysis done over the last history of race riots. You can go far back as 1919, 1958, and we have these epoch moments. Eric Osborne, the historian, wrote a book many years ago called The Age of Extremes, where he talked about the 1930s. And if you think about the 1930s, you had the rise of fascism, particularly Italy and Germany. You had the invasion of Abyssinia, Ethiopia. You had the influence of the eugenics movement. You had the Great Depression, which wasn't a Great Depression, it affected everyone. There was a bumblebee trying to attack me in my kitchen, so as well. So that probably is a good opportunity to lead on to the questions. I'll just invite Jabeer first. What's been, from what you see, the community response so far?
Thank you, Patrick. And firstly, can I just commend Ubele for reaching out to the Muslim Charities Forum at my suggestion, because I think it's really important that those voices are heard. And in terms of thinking through some of the challenges that we've faced, it's important to start at the key point being made by Mudaser about the misogyny that is often a key part of Islamophobia as well. Many of you will remember when Zahra Mohammed was made Secretary of the Muslim Council for Britain, she appeared on Women's Hour. Normally, when somebody achieves that kind of success in a male-dominated organization, Women's Hour is often seen as an opportunity to congratulate and celebrate that achievement. But what actually ended up happening was constant interruptions to her to ask her to justify the operation of the faith in mosques at the time. And the consequence of that for lots of people was to have doubts about the BBC, but there were no consequences for the interview. The interviewer has actually gone on to bigger and better things as a result. And that's what we see time and again, is that actually when people have made Islamophobic and anti-Muslim comments, it doesn't count against them. It doesn't lead to any challenge. And as communities, you then begin to lose trust. And I think that's the key thing that we've seen, is that there's been a loss of trust in state institutions. We no longer see the state as being an institution that's going to protect us or even support us when we're faced with challenges. I know there's been a lot of attention paid to the intervention of the police and how the criminal justice system is now perhaps contributing to the end of the violence. But that's not been our experience in the past, because what we've seen time and again is that the state has been used to coerce us and undermine our legitimate concerns about the way we've been treated. So a few weeks ago, I made a comment about the definition of Islamophobia, pointing out that even if we could agree on a definition, it was unlikely that there was anybody going to be able to regulate it. Certainly not the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And I actually got a letter of complaint from the Equality and Human Rights Commission saying that I was misrepresenting them. And anyway, we couldn't agree on a definition of Islamophobia. So what could we expect them to be doing? And I fear that's where we are at the moment. There are lots of state institutions or not really set up to challenge the racism that's been faced and so on. And I can't help but think that unless that is addressed, we'll create this situation. So last week, ourselves and a number of race equality organizations wrote to a number of ministers asking for a meeting. We've not had a response and we've not had a meeting. Yet on Wednesday, a meeting did take place between Lisa Nandy and the voluntary and community sector, and none of us were invited. There were no Muslim-led charities there. There were no race equality charities there. There were no Black women-led organizations there either. And that's what I really fear, is that if we're going to try and recreate the trust that's been lost, we need government, both nationally and locally, to actually engage with us.
Thanks, Jabeer. And I definitely want to pick that question up a bit later on, a second part of the round of questions. Just to remind everyone, for those who've just joined recently, there is an online poll that would be great if you could complete. We want to try and share the results tonight, but please complete that poll during the course of the evening. I'd like to bring in Kimberly from ARE. What's the response you've seen so far? I know that particularly you've done a lot of work around the Windrush Manifesto. Are there any kind of comparisons with the issues around the Muslim community and Black and regular racialized communities around immigration policy, etc.?
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Patrick. I think there are some parallels that we can draw from the way that the state has responded to people affected by the Windrush scandal and continue to be affected by the Windrush scandal, and the way that the government have responded to the current crisis. I think one of those is the lack of prioritization. We are seeing, with the change of government, a much improved response to people affected by the Windrush scandal, although it is early days, but at least there's been a change of tone and some recognition. But in terms of what Jabeer was saying, in that you don't see that prioritization, you don't see kind of the experts, the people who are running grassroots groups being invited to have those conversations. And it doesn't seem to be, at least so far, a priority for government. I also think that the government response has mostly focused on the symptoms rather than the causes, and we're seeing quite a lot of focus on punitive responses and kind of securitized responses. So the framing of this is being caused by a small group of thugs and this isn't who we are is very much trying to isolate the cause of this as to being a very, very small, specific group of people, to then move the conversation away from some of the more structural issues, whether that's the government's own policies on the hostile environment, or whether that's the rhetoric used to talk about migration more widely, which Jackie mentioned in the previous section. So kind of announcing raids, in particular, establishments which people immediately read as racialized. So yeah, mentioning car washes, mentioning nail salons, instantly brings up in the public imagination particular groups of people, and they are racialized people. Also the focus on criminality and having trying to speed up that process of dealing with criminal acts. Obviously, I welcome criminal acts being taken seriously, but it feels like a very, very narrow conversation, which is not focused on kind of some of the bigger things that you would hope to see in the response from government. So one of the things that the Alliance for Racial Justice have asked for, that Jabeer mentioned, and that is a coalition of charities working on racial justice, is asking for a national reassurance strategy. So that would mean, what is the government actually going to commit to deal with the root causes of these riots, and how are they going to try and rebuild that trust that Jabeer also mentioned has broken down over a long period of time, that the state actually not only has the will, but also has the capacity and the knowledge to protect us. And that's something that we'll be pushing for. We haven't had a response to the letter that has been sent as yet, but we'll continue trying to hold the government to account nonetheless. And I'm sure there'll be more meetings about what those strategies might look like. But when it also comes to looking at the protection of racialized communities, particularly Muslim communities, again, it's kind of focused on security. So the government has put some funding aside so that mosques can use that funding to higher security. But again, no conversation on actually dealing with the root causes of radicalization, of far-right violence, and the conditions that make it, that exacerbate and those views. So things that have been alluded to already. So lack of funding, geographical inequalities, the kind of long tail of austerity. And we're dealing with a government that has kind of run an election campaign based on fiscal responsibility. And so it's also something that we need to be aware of, is that once again, it's quite a limited response that's coming, because I think there is potentially a fear of committing to things that are going to cost money. And while the state is definitely responsible for dealing with the structural issues that have led to this, I do think that communities are going to have to continue to do a lot of the hard work, because that's what's been warming over the past week to 10 days, is seeing people in their community showing up to protect one another. And I think we're going to need more of that solidarity going forward over the next year, because whatever the state's response is probably not going to be enough.
Yeah, thanks. Susan, last time we worked together was about 4 years ago during the time of COVID, and the Filipino community were disproportionately affected as a result of the COVID pandemic. And already we've seen evidence of your community being attacked, as particularly NHS staff. What's been the community response, and what's it like for a community which, you know, in terms of intersectionality, and you know, your voices may not be as big as other communities. What is out there? What is support that you think is required for you and other communities?
Yeah, as you said, Vernon, we are a small community, but we're bigger than, you know, than what our specific community is. And the attack against migrants who are working in the frontline sector of the NHS and the care sector, and even personal services, is really so shocking to our community that you know, we are very fearful of what's happening. And people in our community keeps on asking me, what do you do? Shall we not just go to work? Can we ask our employer to allow us not to, you know, go out of the house and not go to work? But you know, their services are important in the communities as frontline workers. And everybody knows that people who are in need of those services will see that many migrant people work in the frontline services. So our response in the community has been really understanding what's happening, because many of us do, you know, had a real shock, not understanding why suddenly this is happening in our communities. And of course, the understanding that we need to understand that racism is irrational, and that it's also emanating from a very structural and colonial legacy that many of our communities have experienced in the past. I mean, many of our Asian migrant colleagues in the NHS and the care sectors are trying to come to terms with it. But one of the experience I have in terms of response was because I live locally in Walthamstow, which is my hometown for the last 20 years, is the way in which our community is organized in our area, where when we heard about the targeting of the immigration center advice here in our community, we really talk with each other, organize and spread, you know, information to each other, talk to our neighbors. You know, sometimes you don't talk to your neighbors too much, and then suddenly we're all talking to each other, because suddenly there's people who are coming to our communities who are really going to try and sow hatred and violence. And the unprecedented response from our community, you know, shopkeepers, frontline workers, hospital, you know, everybody in the community, Black, brown, and white, responded very, very well in the call to protect our communities. And even our Labour MP, who told us not to come out of our homes to protest against and leave the police to do their job, was ignored, thankfully, by the people who protested. So we came in numbers. We were armed. We armed with placards and posters protesting, and also we came with, you know, a pocket full of hope and courage that the community will come together in solidarity to protect each other. I mean, Walthamstow area has always been a target of the right wing. Many years ago, they did try to come to our communities too, and we did stop them. No, maybe not as big as this last Wednesday response, but we did manage to stop them. And they will come back. We know that they will come back. And therefore, our community organizing, you know, me as a migrant coming from, as a refugee background, have experienced all my life organizing the communities, getting people to understand, to get empowered, and understanding that the root of racism is not with people who are ordinarily being victimized by poverty and hopelessness, but with the way in which institutions have been set up so that people will be allowed to be racist, in the way in which the Home Office has latched onto our communities. You know, they said Rwanda flight is gone, but now what they're doing is putting those flights for Vietnamese communities who will be raided in nail bar salons to be brought out to the UK, and most of them probably have experienced trafficking and violence from the people who brought them to the UK. So the continuous attack of the government, even with the current government, in relation to the immigration policies that they're doing, is not a good response. That the government has to come to realize that the response to issues around immigration is to be approaching it on a humane and respecting people's rights, and ensuring that the communities where migrants are working and living should be given resources to build communities, solidarity together, so that we can live together and understand each other and support each other, not to put all this kind of hate messages, which, as we know from the past government, have done to our communities, vilifying migrants and refugees who are coming to the UK, working in the frontline services or seeking protection, which is their right to do. So it's really this really heartwarming response. And I feel really, you know, even when people said, oh, it's very dangerous, don't go out there, I knew that there will be people with me, because I've spoken with people to come together, to go out there and stop the racists. I know that, as colleagues said already earlier, these people who are coming to our communities are, you know, disempowered and are hopeless in their own rights. I think that community building has to be done together with people in the community who are feeling the same thing. So, you know, our response has been really, really great. And I know we will continue this response. It will not go away. So I hope other boroughs, other communities will replicate that.
Okay, time is running against us. We've got another panel to go to. But before I do that, I just want to ask one question. You've already given your responses about what the government should do. Letters have been sent to government already from race equality organisations. Issues have been raised already about it's not just about policing. If there was a government minister on this line tonight, what key demand would you want to say right now? If there's a government minister, it could be any department, it's your choice, any department, could be the Prime Minister, Cabinet, Treasury, you name, you choose. What would be a key demand? Because we want to use this to start the conversation right towards a solution bit at the end. So let's start with you first, Susan. One key demand.
Well, I think really the key demands from us, especially from our migrant community, is that the government has to end this hostile attitude, policies against migrants and refugees, and that they have to stop all the kind of institutional attack that they have done, like the no recourse to public funds, like stopping the boat, which will not stop people coming into the UK, punishing people who are coming here seeking protection and working here for crimes that was done to them and not the crimes that they have done. I think it's important to for the government to invest in the communities so that we can address poverty issues, because it's not only, you know, many of us, Black, white, and brown people are impacted by poverty, and then to be able to change the narrative that the government had, or in the past government had put out there, and stop this kind of blaming of migrants and refugees coming to the UK, because we know we built the society, we continue to support building the society in a kind of positive and a kind of, you know, rich society that we have now.
That's great. I'm going to stop you there. It's fantastic. Brilliant. Jabeer?
Patrick, it's important to point out there is no magic panacea. There isn't a silver bullet that if we did one thing, it would get resolved. However, I do want to build on what Susan's saying. If there was a government minister on the line today, the first thing I'd say is end the two-child benefit cap. If we were serious about attacking some of the root causes, attacking poverty is going to be fundamental to that. And we know it's leading to a disproportionate impact on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And if you're serious about signaling your intent, that would be one way of doing it.
Okay, thanks, Doctor. And finally, Kimberly?
And I agree with the previous two comments wholeheartedly. But if there were a minister on the line now, I would ask them to, and maybe they're doing this and I just don't know because they haven't met us, but for them to work with experts on the far right, and there are a lot of them who actually know how to tackle the far right and and particularly the ideas and their popularity, to put a plan in place for the next 10 years for how they're actually going to root this out, because we're in danger, we're at risk, and a lot of us are afraid. A lot of us were afraid to leave our homes last week, and a lot of very brave people did anyway. And that would indicate at least that they're taking this seriously and not just dealing with the symptoms in a way that they think will fall well with the public.
Thank you, everyone. For my 2 pence worth, I think we need to revamp the Equality and Rights Commission, raise to the ground and start from scratch. That's my personal opinion. Philip, over to you before I get attacked by a wasp in my room, in my kitchen.
Okay, let the wasp out of the window.
Well, I'm trying. By the way, over to you.
Don't squash it. Okay. Thank you for that panel. That was really, really insightful. And I've just been, reading through the chat. There's so much really, really important information there, and really, really, really important things that we are going to capture. But what we want to try and do now is actually to basically start capturing some of the demands, right? So when we're saying we need action, we need answers, but we need action, really. And what are some of the demands? So I'm going to ask if we can use the Q&A function, because the Q&A function has, I think, the opportunity for us to, I think, upvote, if I'm correct, the different entries that are put in there. So ideally, if we have very specific demands that we want to make of government, that we want to make of public bodies, that we want to make of third sector institutions, grant makers, social investors, businesses, corporates, let's put those in the Q&A if we can. I hope that makes sense. If you click on the bottom panel, there should be a Q&A tab. For this next section, I am going to invite another 3 panelists, and we're going to look at, what do our communities need in this current era we are in. And I'm going to invite back Mudaser Ali from Muslim Charities Forum, Nasra Ayub from Future Phoenix, and Fatih Kane from the Angelou Center. So I'll invite you all to unmute and to, yes, fantastic. I think we're all in the room together. So yeah, I will just go straight in, and I'll ask, first of all, Nasra, what is the importance of organizing and I guess self-organizing during this time? And what role does intergenerational leadership play? So, what role, the young people have in particular? I know that's your hat with Future Phoenix. And maybe before you start, just say a little bit about Future Phoenix and the work you do broadly.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my name is Nasra, and I'm leading Future Phoenix. So Future Phoenix is the youth-led strand of the Phoenix Way. And for those that don't know what Phoenix Way is, it's a movement, a network, a kind of a partnership that is basically for Black and racially minoritized communities, resourcing them, and kind of for Black and racially minoritized communities. And Future Phoenix is the youth-led aspect of that. So kind of engaging young people who are belonging to Black or racially minoritized communities in funding, in kind of decision-making, in shifting power within the UK kind of funding sector. So yeah, heading that up, trying to get more young people involved in these kind of conversations, but beyond that, trying to get more resources to young people and youth-led organizations. And then I guess in terms of the importance of organizing ourselves during these kind of times is that I think one thing that we recognize when things like this happen is that we are our only kind of protection and our only kind of source of having, how do I put it, kind of just when we look at kind of a movement in the past, when we look at kind of changes that are made, it's always grassroots organizations and movements and communities that are at the heart of it. And we recognize with times like this, when, you know, communities need protection, such as Muslim communities, Black communities, those that are coming from other racialized communities, it's not the government that is doing what is needed at that moment of time. It's actually communities that are coming out and protecting each other and actually being there for each other. And again, I'm from Bristol, and Bristol is very much known for being very kind of politically active. And kind of even just there's a lot of activists here. And, you know, when there was these riots happening, and then there was the kind of second wave happening on the Wednesday, the majority of the people that came out on the streets were those that were coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, those that were locals to Bristol, those that were young, old, and in between, and coming out and kind of chanting and shouting that, you know, this is like our streets, you don't bring that type of stuff here. And for those that know about Bristol, Bristol has a heavy history with race and racism. And, you know, back in 2020, there was the whole Colston Hall situation where the statue was thrown into the river. So I think what I would say in terms of the importance of organizing ourselves is that that's where the heart of kind of change comes from. That's the heart of where impact is had more so. And I think that's what I would say is that the importance of resourcing grassroots organizations, the importance of resourcing communities to be able to continue doing their work. Because when we see the cost of living crisis happening, for example, it's communities that are donating, it's communities that are putting together kind of packaging and kind of support services for their own communities. It's not coming from the government because there's a gap. Where there's a gap, communities come into that space, and we see that all the time. And then I guess in terms of the importance of intergenerational leadership, this riot has impacted young people heavily. And I think one of the things that I really, really wanted to hone in on is this idea of the fact that it's the summer holidays right now. Today it came out that the youngest person that was arrested for these riots was 12 years old. What does that tell us? It means that young people, kids, are also being arrested and are also being engaged in these behaviors, in these rhetorics, and are being kind of fed this by their parents, by the media, and they're taking it in. So right now, we're not really hearing the impact that this will have in schools, in education systems, etc. But come September, it will look very different in terms of how young people are being affected in education systems, especially young kids. So I think for me, what I wanted to hone in on in terms of intergenerational leadership is kind of how do we engage with those that are older than us and younger than us, but also with parents and with community leaders to ensure that this rhetoric is stamped out before it becomes even worse than it is already. So yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll leave what I have to say there for now.
That's helpful. We'll come back to you. Thank you so much. And Fatty, let me bring you in. Can you help us to just think a little bit about you know, the systemic issues that are highlighted by the riots, and what do you think could be some of the long-term strategies you know, that we could implement to prevent these type of, I guess, you know, incidents happening in an ongoing way? What does that look like to you? And please do introduce yourself and your work before you answer. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Philip, and hi, everyone. My name is Fatty Khan. I am the Executive Director at the Angelou Center. We are a by and for specialist organization dedicated to supporting Black and racialized women, children, and young people, survivors of domestic abuse. And thank you so very much for the opportunity to take part of this very, very much needed conversation. Thank you very much for organizing. So, wow, yeah, that's quite a question, because I mean, it is, how do you put it? We have to think at the same time short term and long term, because we know even though the riots have died away, we'll have to live with this reality of living in constant fear, that's just I mean, this is going to be the reality of it. And we need to remain vigilant. We have to. We know the biggest danger will come when we are off guard. And it will happen randomly. And unfortunately, this is going to be just how do we respond to it individually, but also collectively. For us, what has worked, I just forgot to mention that the Angelou Center is located in Newcastle in the West End, where it is the most diverse and deprived area of the city. And we need to continue mobilizing our communities. Like the local leaders and organizations have been very proactive in countering the narratives of hate by organizing events that promote unity and understanding. And really that just has to continue to happen in the mosque in the West End, like one of the biggest mosques, Bilal Jamal. They were organizing standing unity events where they were opening the mosque for everyone in the community to come visit, have food, have conversation, just kind of try and debunk some of the myths around Islam. I think we just need that constant education and just not assume that people know some of the basics because, I mean, the religion has been so much demonized in social media or the traditional media. So that constant education just needs to happen. And I think also anti-racist education must be embedded in our schools, in our workplaces, in communities. This should not be just like a one-off initiative. I know there is a lot of pots of funding here and there to just do, anti-racist work. But then I'm sure in 6 months, it's just going to be over. But this needs to be very sustained efforts if we want to change mindsets and really challenge the biases that lead to such violence. And I think additionally, we need to focus on supporting community-based organizations, particularly those led by and serving Black and racialized and racialized communities. These organizations are on the front lines, and their work in trauma-informed care, youth outreach, community organizing, community mobilizing is just critical for long-term change. It's just like it has to be a 360-degree, very comprehensive, brave, and sustained efforts for us to really tackle some of these issues. And on the anti-racist work, just like a quick word, because I think it's a very important area of advocacy. What we have seen already is the money is being channeled to the usual suspects, those mainstream white organizations. Like, come on. What they would do is to turn around and subcontract the real experts that are us. Then just give the money to us directly. Why do you have to go through these organizations? It's just, again, even in terms of response, we would just kind of repeat those patterns. I really think we need also like mechanisms, both at community level. Another thing that I think if it doesn't happen in your area, do establish support networks for those affected by the violence to come together and share their experiences. I think someone mentioned it in the chat, to heal together and to support one another. We need communities to come together. Sometimes we are just so isolated. We are individuals and we just too lazy to invest in networking. We need to do that. There are so many associations. We need to invest in joining those organizations, invest in going out and meeting other people and just create that community. Sometimes we're just not very good at keeping in touch with each other. We meet in buses, in restaurants, in the street, at the beach, but we kind of, exchange our numbers, our emails, and that's it. We're not very good at keeping in touch. And this is something we need to do. And I think at the institutional level, especially, I think it's Nasra who just mentioned it, the schools are reopening in few weeks. And I think, honestly, we really need to focus our efforts in schools. We have been saying this at the Angelou Center because we support children and young people, and our services are nationally recognized as trauma-informed and culturally appropriate for Black and racialized minorities. When they face racism, they come to us. They don't go to the police. They don't go to the schools. They come to us, despite those schools having those zero tolerance policies. It doesn't matter. They just don't trust. They have lost trust. I think that's what Mudaser was saying. We really need to rebuild trust. We have had a case a few weeks ago, a kid who has been quite badly bitten with a broken nose and a black eye. And when he returned to school, it's the teacher himself who were like, oh, I'm sure he's involved in some kind of gang activity in front of the classroom. So the child took our children and young people caseworker. He was like, you see, this is what is expected of me. Why should I just go, I should just go and join a gang. This is what is expected of me. When I face, because those kids are survivors of domestic violence, they are not safe in their homes or in their communities. They get out in the street, they're not safe. They go in school, they're not safe. They go to the library, they're not safe. They constantly have to face these racist microaggressions. And I really think we need to do something about our young people and our children, because they're facing racism at a super very young age. Yes. And this is just something that will continue, they will grow up with. And to me, any long-term strategy will have to go through us investing in outreach education in schools. That's just like a must. It just has to happen. It has to be part of it.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's really, really insightful. And Mudaser, we'll come back to you in terms of, I guess, looking at now, how can we strengthen solidarity? Fatty talked about this thing of building those bonds together, right, as a community. But how can we build that along different ethnic groups, different religious groups, different racial groups across society? What do you think those mechanisms can be? We heard a little bit about maybe education and starting at that level, but from your perspective, how do we do that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really, really interesting question to pose, and I'm sure there's lots of different views on that. Firstly, thank you, Nasra, for sort of sharing those really, really insightful insights of us around youth and intergenerational organizing, and also really thank you, Patty, to hear all that great work that you're doing in the north for the members of our community, and the work that you're doing to support young people is amazing as well. Now, in terms of thinking about strengthening solidarity, I think that where we stand and what we're seeing as the things which are starting to work a bit better is, first and foremost, for each of us as individual organizations, as individual leaders who have access to our own communities, just starting off by being really confident self-advocates, right? So just being really confident about our own position at the table, right? Because if we can start to be really confident about our own position at the table, they don't want us around their table, we can build our own. Right? So for me, the starting point really in terms of building solidarity amongst ourselves is actually confidence in being willing to wear the sleeves of our identities well amongst ourselves confidently and with full confidence. So whether that's Muslim, whether it's South Asian, whether it's Black, there are other identities or protected characteristics we haven't looked at here. There's a whole set of forms of discrimination and other things that members of the disabled community, for example, face. But it's that whatever it is, wherever you face discrimination, if we're really going to move towards cultures of anti-racism and building solidarity, I'd say that, or even anti-oppression, if we're looking at this from a wider lens, for me, I think that what it starts with is self-advocacy. So it's that first, what we really need to do is question our own experiences, question our experience to date in engaging with the system and engaging one another, and try to interrogate where it is and why it is that we don't feel like we can engage, right? Because that's what we need as a first step before we can get collaborative action to help us build mindsets of collaborative thinking, right? Because if we can get our mindsets in the right place, we can actually be willing to come around the same table or create one if the table's not there for us. I think for me, that's the first step. And then from there, you know, what we definitely work on as you know, as something is just look at where you can start off with the basics. So just take things back to, you know, to first principles. I think it's that even when we're looking at very tense scenarios like this, but we're faced with an emergency, so really just try to go back to simplified ways of thinking, right? Or trying to sort of simplify things. So just thinking about what the primary objective is, right? So that in principle, really, for any one of us, all we are is just neighbors who want to get to know one another and understand each other, right? So it's that, yes, we are facing similar issues and challenges, but if we allow the system to distract us sometimes with too much of what's going on, we can get overwhelmed and just not move anywhere. So for me, I think that there's also a sense of beauty and solidarity that comes from simplifying things, right? And there are some ways that we can see that emerging as well. So for example, one of our partner organizations is another infrastructure organization, the Muslim Council of Britain. They've got a fantastic initiative that they encourage mosques to do, which is called Visit My Mosque. So it's just an open house, open event, anyone can go in, right? At any point. I can say with confidence that as a community anchor organization, you can get in touch with people at mosques, right? If you want to learn a little bit more. If you've got neighbors who are from a different faith community, whether that's Muslim, whether it's Hindu, whether it's Sikh, whether it's Christian or no faith at all, see what you can do to actually engage with them. See if you can start off with a short 5-minute conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to be hours and hours, but see what you can do just to start off with that first step. Because I think that that's where we will be able to start to work towards more of those longer term solutions in partnership and in collaboration, right? Because we know that there are similar issues and challenges that we're facing because we're being affected by and oppressed by the same systems, right? So across the board, we've got challenges for our young people and opportunities and disenfranchisement. We know that our, you know, women from our communities are being disproportionately targeted and attacked, whether it's Muslim or whether they're Muslim or not. But for us, moving forward does need us to actually try to understand and hear one another, first and foremost, to help to actually build those platforms for collaboration. Because once we've got that shared sense of understanding, that's when we can go into the fun conversations later on about governance, right? So how we actually govern ourselves and how we coordinate to make sure that we empower one another, uphold righteous working, valued and principled working, and don't just fall into the ills of the system or the same systems which are oppressing us.
Fantastic. I really like the analogy of, you know, build, if they don't give us a seat at the table, we need to build our own table. So I feel like that is a really, really interesting, and because it's about self-empowerment. And I guess, you know, I'm now down to 30-second round. I'm going to come to each of you and just ask. I'll start with Nasra. So what do you feel we need to do to be safe right now in the UK?
I think two things. One, continue having these conversations, but number two, I think we need to continue to I think white people need to be better allies or continue to be better allies. I think that is very, very important. So for example, I didn't go out to anti-protest. I'm so sorry, I didn't do that. But my white friends, they did, because they knew that they could, and they, you know, were not going to be as much of us at risk as I was, but they still checked in with me as well. So I think for me, I think just put a little bit more pressure on white people to be a better allies. I think that's really important, I think, in this time and space right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Fatty?
What we did very practically at the Angelou Center, because of our location being at the West End, in the hotspot of, you know, all the things that were happening. Actually, last week on Tuesday, we had to close our offices for the remainder of the week. So we reopened this morning, and the first call we got was from the Northumbria police to check on us. And that really goes back to what Mudaser was just saying. You have to have your seat at the table. Last week, Monday, we were not having any information from anywhere. We're just like, oh my goodness, we are so vulnerable as a refuge. And no one is trying to just ask if we are doing fine. And we heard that there were a joint engagement group with all the faith leaders, the community leaders, the councillors, the superintendent, all the local authorities, and they were consulting, and no one, we were like, we are 10 minutes away from the riots. Like, no one is, reaching out to us. And I made a bit of noise, and I've been invited to everything. And I've been, yes, just kind of, even the in-person meeting they had with a very kind of small group of community leaders and faith leaders at the Civic Center. I was there with the Northeast Combined Authority Mayor, the Police and Crime Commissioner, the superintendent. Like, you just have to make noise to be invited at the table. And let me tell you this. The response at first, initially, from the police and local authorities felt like, that quote, when it goes like, all women are white, all Black are men, and some of us are brave. It really felt like that. It was all faith leaders, community leaders, Black men. And then the field representation from women organizations, white. And you just have to make sure that you are there in that room. It is important. And we continue to do that advocacy work to make sure we are also part of the recovery plans. Actually, tomorrow, the Police and Crime Commissioner is coming to visit our office with another senior director. And it's just, you have just to make noise and just be confident. That goes also back to what Mudaser was just saying. We need to be confident and just make a case of, you need our voice here. No one will be talking on our behalf as women from Black and racialized minorities. No one is representing us. You need us to sit at the table and tell you what our lived experience is. So that's what we've been doing. My last point, we know we got there because we have great relationship with the Police and Crime Commissioner. So what we are doing now, alongside with another sister organization called Sangini, based in South Shield, we are reaching out to other sister organizations, organizing ourselves so that we are even stronger, because, strength comes with numbers. We're not interested in being the only, Black-led organization sitting at the table. We want all of us to be heard. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much. We are the table, I think.
Exactly.
We'll agree. Fantastic. Mudaser, final 30 seconds. Do you have one point on how we can keep safe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the first step really is just for ourselves to get organized. So just with your own leadership teams, with your own organization, or even with your own family, just understand what you can do if an emergency strikes. Do you have access to food? Do you have blankets? Do you have contacts with the fire service? Do you have contact with the police commissioner? Do you have contacts with the person that's involved in health and social care commissioning, or what is it? Like, who do you actually have access to, and what could you do if something struck? So if you can get yourself organized, that might mean that you can help others as well on that journey later on, because there might be a case of where someone reaches out to you for guidance because they don't know. So if you can at least prime yourself to begin with, it helps everyone in the collective.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being such a wonderful and insightful panel. And yeah, we look forward to this conversation continuing. The chat is on fire right now. There's so much in there. And I'd like to close this panel and invite Yvonne Field to come and close with a few reflections and look at some of the demands. But thank you again to our panelists.
Okay, well, I'd like to also invite Philip and Patrick and any of the panelists that would like to join us for this final session. I am aware of time. We've actually got only 6 minutes to go. It was a very ambitious, but much needed and, well, very necessary space for these conversations. And I would just like to say, before we kind of move into the last 5 minutes or so, that we will, for sure, be pulling together all the comments, all the demands, all the questions, all the ideas, all the experiences into a comprehensive document. What I was picking up throughout the conversation, either directly or as undertones, is that we need to create our own table. There's been an institutional silence from the government. When we did the We Need Answers campaign back in 2020, we had over 600 signatures to a letter to the then Boris Johnson. We received, with support from Lee Day, a 10-page letter and response. We were demanding inquiries into the disproportionate deaths of Black and racially minoritized communities during COVID. And I think, and it feels like there is an opportunity here to really get some collective leverage and voice in relation to these issues. I feel disgusted that the government has not yet responded to the letter Ubele was a signature to. We have to put pressure. I was reading the Gus John letter that he wrote to the Jamaican Gleaner the other day about what has happened, and he quoted Sivanandan, which says, who was a major race academic, he's now passed, but the quote that stays with me is, "We are here because they were there." We are not going away. We need to ensure that our demands are heard and taken seriously, and we have real leverage collectively as Black and brown communities around this country. Can we just take a couple of questions, and we will also make sure that these questions are answered. So please give us time, because this is incredibly pressured times. But I'm just, and also, capacity is limited in many respects, but we are committed to taking it forward. Okay, I mean, there's a question here from Layla. I'm just picking out one or two. Given that EHRC came up a couple of times, there's a question about how could the Equality Human Rights Commission use its powers more effectively to address the roots of the problem? I think, Matt, you mentioned them, I think, earlier, but there was a couple other people. Anybody else that might have thought on that question?
Yvonne, if I
yes,
can
please, Jabeer, was it
back
you?
on
Sorry,
that,
I didn't remember who had actually mentioned them. A couple of people had this evening.
Well, what we've seen with the EHRC is that if you look at European countries, they often see England or the UK as having a far better equality legislation than they do. But what we've seen with the EHRC is a failure to actually implement it, a failure to regulate it. And a key demonstration of that was that Baroness Varsi made a complaint to them about Islamophobia within the Conservative Party. The EHRC said we're going to investigate, but only after the party carries out its own investigation. Lo and behold, the party carried out its investigation. Everyone rejected it, and the EHRC decided not to carry out their investigation. So until we address issues about independence at the EHRC, we're not going to have a regulator that's actually able to make the most of the legislation that we already have in place. I'm not arguing that it doesn't need to be improved, but we could do better with what we've got, and we really need an independent regulator to be able to do that.
Thank you. Yes, sure.
Since it was created, when they merged the Commission for Race Equality, Disability Rights Commission, and the Women's Equality Commission, it's failed on race equality. Absolutely, it's not used any of its enforcement powers. I can't remember the time when they actually took legal action against any breaches by public or private sector companies. The actual membership of the Commission does not reflect the community. It reflects one particular viewpoint of politics, which supported the Sewell report in a nutshell, and we knew what happened with that report. But more importantly, the current legislation that we have the public sector equality duty has a duty to the public good to promote good relations. That part of the equality legislation has not been properly implemented for the last 15, 20 years. Yeah, around promoting, and it goes back to the heart of the matter that you have negative, spurious stuff that reinforces stereotypes and stereotypes about Black people, Muslim people, and some of the things in the chat. There should be something reflecting Afrophobia, anti-Blackness, as well as Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And there has to be an educational program. The CRE, for warts and all, at least it had an ongoing educational program educating the public about race relations, and we don't have that at all in this country currently.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Jabeer. I am really aware of time, and I'd like to sort of say a couple of things about where we go next. There was a question about what were we hoping to achieve for this session, which actually we will come to in a moment. However, I'd like to invite Rowan Carr, who is an exceptional man, creator of Tending the Wounds of Racial Trauma, which is an immersive and illuminating course for Black bodies and for bodies of culture who experience systemic racism and racial microaggressions. Sorry, Rowan, I'm just looking for you on my screen. Oh, there you are at the bottom of my screen at this time. Thank you for joining us, and really thank you so much for jumping in at the weekend and speaking to me and agreeing to actually hold this space. Would you like to just say a little bit about the space that you're going to hold at about 8:15 for 45 minutes? Could you just say a little bit about that? And anyone who's on this call, we've still got 147 people on the call, is welcome to stay online. We will make everyone visible who joins this session. And Rowan, just do you want to say a little bit about the 45-minute session that you're going to host straight at 8:15?
Yes, thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Ubele. I just joined in the last sort of 15 minutes to hear some of the debate that was going on. And I really warmly invite you, encourage you to stay on for another 45 minutes after this session, because what often goes unnoticed is the actual psycho-emotional and physiological impact of the stress that all Black and brown bodies were experiencing over the past few weeks. Due to this rise of internal terrorism. And it was terrorism. It was terrorism played out in the media. It was terrorism played out on our streets. So yeah, the opportunity to just spend 45 minutes through a somatic focus. So we'll be working with the body, also with the mind. We include the mind with the body. It's all part of a whole package. And we'll just unpack a few things, and we'll just tend some of the wounds that you may have experienced but haven't had your attention drawn to. And the reality is very often we get forced into action and doing things. And by that very nature, we don't look to ourselves and we don't look to heal the immediate wounds that we experienced. And that then becomes an accumulative effect. Ultimately until we have some kind of breakdown, physiological, emotional, and or mental. So I really humbly encourage you to stay on for 45 minutes after this session, and I look forward to holding that space for you.
Thank you, Rowan. And that session starts at 8:15, so it gives time just to breathe, maybe get some water or drink, or just a loo break, and to come back into community for Rowan to guide us through a really worthwhile, an important session, absolutely important session, fundamental to our mental health and well-being. So where do we go from here? Well, first of all, Ubele, although we took a lead, we did not organise this webinar in isolation. We consulted with and engaged a whole host of organisations, some of whom are here, some of whom are contributing, and some of whom were not able to contribute directly. I would just like to say thanks to Action for Race Equality, Caribbean and African Health Network, Muslim Charities Foundation, Inclusive North, Runnymede Trust, Future Phoenix, Race Equality Foundation, the Angelou Centre, and many other organisations that came forward at really the last moment to contribute to and support this event. I'd also like to say thanks to the hosting team. I mean, you know, all over the weekend, emails and WhatsApps and text messages were flying backwards and forwards. And I'd like to say thank you, special thanks to Christopher, Becky, Remy, V, and Ali for really just holding this space and making it happen this evening. As all of you will know, organising community-led events are, you know, challenging at the least, and really within these circumstances that have been very challenging. For a whole raft of reasons. There is a poll, as we mentioned. Please, it's not precise. It was put together over the weekend. Answer as many questions as you feel drawn to answer. We really want to try and pull together thoughts, ideas, feelings, intentions, demands to actually bring those together into a comprehensive document. We must create our own table. One of the ways in which we're doing that, some of you may or may not know, Susan, Fatty, and Nasra are part of a national initiative called the Phoenix Way, which is helping to build national infrastructure for Black and brown communities. It's also supporting the implementation of grant programs. We've not heard very much this evening about money, which I think is good. on one level, because it means that actually the resources within our own communities are being utilised, but also, as we know, this money is our money, so we also need to make demands on it. So actually the Phoenix Way is not just one national initiative that's involved in helping to support the development of Black and Brown infrastructure. I was on a meeting this morning, National Emergencies Committee, and I was hard pressed to see one Black or Brown face out of 119 people this morning. It was quite shocking. These are all the VCSs and other organisations that are infrastructure. We are not there, and we need to ensure, therefore, we create our own tables. So please look up the Phoenix Way. Please complete the poll. We will write up what's come from this evening, and we will look to convene another conversation next month, which reports back on what's happened, and we will link with our colleagues in the race equality sector to do that. Thank you for staying online for another 5 minutes. I've indulged your time. So thank you for being patient with us. Thank you for being here this evening. We started with 180 people. We had nearly 400 sign up. There's still 135 of you online, which is amazing. I know this last 10, 12 days has been testing, trying, exhausting, and just downright terrible and nasty. So I'm just really pleased that you stayed with us on this journey this evening, and we look forward to meeting you next month, but also being in touch with you tomorrow, and sending you the poll and be in touch with you just a few days later with the write-up from here. Okay, so please take a good break for 5-10 minutes. Please come back and join this space. There's not another link. This is a space that Rowan is going to host the session that he's agreed to offer us. So maybe it's just time to exhale, and hopefully we'll see some of you shortly. And if you aren't able to join us, thank you so much. Thank you, sorry, to the speakers, all the speakers that we've had this evening. We've really appreciated your brilliant contribution. And also thank you, Philip and Patrick, for co-hosting this evening. A total community effort, and it's been inspiring, it's been thoughtful, it's been challenging, and it's been necessary, absolutely necessary. So thank you for being here. And please don't click your leave button, go and take a break and come back, and hopefully some of you, well, we'll all see each other in this space. Thank you very much. And good night for those who are leaving.